Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates for the first time in 4 years, and a 30-year mortgage rate rises right along with it. Russia ramps up their attacks on key Ukrainian cities, but some good news. American Airlines will now resume alcohol sales on domestic flights after April the 18th. And do we need a drink after this? We've got that and more. You're watching Wall Street Wrap-Up on this Friday, March the 18th, 2022. Hi, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm André LABORDE. Hope your week went well. Well, this week, the Federal Reserve did what they were supposed to do months ago and raised interest rates for their first time in 4 years by 0.25%. Or 25 basis points. Now, to say they were late for the party and raising rates is an understatement. With inflation now at almost 8% from 1 year ago, the cost of a 30-year mortgage today, on average today, is at 4.5%, which is an increase of over 40% since just last December, just 4 months ago. And the average cost of a home has also risen from last year by 15% and is now at $357,000. Now, as an example, with mortgage rates going up, a new buyer is paying 28% more today in monthly mortgage payments than they would have 1 year ago. Well, coming up tonight, we have a great guest who has literally been in the fight. In just a minute, we're going to be talking with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. General Boykin spent the last 36 years in the U.S. Army, and most of it in Special Forces. He was also one of the original members of the Army's Delta Force, and he became Delta's commanding officer. General Boykin later became Undersecretary of Defense, and he was Deputy Director of the CIA in charge of Special Activities. CIA Special Activities is not planning the company's Christmas party, too. He'll be with us in just a minute. Now, today, President Joe Biden talked with China's Xi Jinping about China's failure to denounce Russia in their invasion of Ukraine. Prior to the call, it was reported that Mr. Biden was to threaten repercussions should China lend military or economic help to Russia in their takeover of Ukraine. Normally, the first country to release details and responses to the call sets the narrative, and then the other country has to do cleanup or is in a responsive mode. After the 2-hour call to Xi Jinping, China beat us in responding. According to the Chinese news sources, China reportedly told Joe Biden they will not accept threats or coercion, that they will retaliate against the United States, and that they also demand the United States admit our role as the initiator in the Ukraine crisis. Well, as I said, normally the first country after a call sets the narrative, and China beat us to that punch. Well, it was a good week for Wall Street. Has the carnage finished, and have we hit bottom and starting to rise? Well, all the indexes had their best week since November of 2020. And this week, the Dow Jones ended at 34,749. That was up almost 5.5% for the week. And the S&P 500, they closed up at 4,463, up 6% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 13,893, up over 8.2% for the week. Wells Fargo analysts have a buy rating on Bank of America stock with a new price target of BOA at $66 a share. Well, let's get to our guest this evening, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. He was former commanding officer of the Army's Delta Force, as well as Deputy Director of CIA for Special Activities, and he was also Undersecretary of Defense. Best of all, he's here with us tonight. Hi, General. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
General, this week, the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, gave a speech to the joint session of Congress, both the House and the Senate, in which he asked for air cover. Your thoughts on his request for a no-fly zone?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of a no-fly zone certainly being flown by American pilots. Now, that said, I am all in favor of giving him the 28 MiG-29s. I think that we should give him those airplanes. I think that the people who are speaking on his behalf, like people from the State Department, are not in a position to be able to determine what the needs of the Ukrainian military are. Let the Ukrainians make the decision as to whether they want and need those aircraft. And if they do, then we ought to give it to them. But I am not in favor of Americans flying a no-fly zone.
In World War II, before the U.S. involvement, we had the American Volunteer Group. In fact, it was headed by a guy from Louisiana, General Claire Chennault. And these were volunteers that they flew the Curtiss P-40, and it was fighting for China against the Japanese. And these were specifically not associated with the United States. They were Americans that were volunteers. And during the Battle of Britain, they had many Polish, Czechoslovakian, American that fought in the Battle of Britain. Is that something that would be a more thinking outside of the box that could help Ukraine?
I would personally have no issue with that whatsoever. And look, you go back to World War II and Claire Chennault as they flew the hump there over the Himalayas and supported the Chinese. I think that they have amassed an incredible record of success in supporting the Chinese there. And I think the same can be said for the volunteer Air Corps there that flew in the European theater during World War II. So I would not object to that, but a uniformed military person flying part of that no-fly zone, I would not want to do that. Now, we may reach a point based on the humanitarian crisis where that is the only humane thing left to do is to get Americans up there in the air and stop the slaughter.
Vladimir Putin, in the Russian term, he escalates to de-escalate. Do you think that they're going to be leveling the cities of Ukraine rather than have his soldiers go literally street to street?
Well, I think you're already seeing it. I think that's exactly what they are doing right now. They are leveling those cities. And I think that if you look at what's happening today, for example, what's being reported is that there is the heaviest shelling thus far of Kiev. And I think that he is going to humble the city of Kiev. He's going to rubble the city of Kiev. I think that he is going to bring them to bay and use that as a stepping stone for trying to figure out what his off-ramp is or what negotiations he's willing to enter into. See, I think his back is against the wall. I think that he knows that he is done as the Soviet premier. And I think now it's a matter of getting out with some degree of or some face-saving method.
Do you think that there's I'll say in Putin's inner circle, do you think that there's a Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, say, that would be willing to do away with Vladimir Putin?
I do. I think that the oligarchs are part of the issue here. I think the oligarchs first of all, they're losing a lot of money. So I think the oligarchs are fed up with him. I think that this was a misstep going into the Ukraine. It did not go the way that he planned and what he promised the oligarchs. And now I think that his days are numbered. It may be another year before they ultimately throw him out. But I think he's gone. If you look at the mothers out in the street there that are protesting now and being locked up and being punished for being out there, they're still out there. They're still protesting all over Russia because of what they see as a needless war that should not be fought.
This week, the head of his FSB, which is his spy chief, he fired. So I'm curious if he's isolating himself more and more, that he's cutting himself off and only listening to selected bits of information. And as you know, for any leader, when you select yourself to only what you want to hear, is that always the best?
Yeah, and by the way, that's not the only one that he's fired here. And yes, it's a strong indication that he is frustrated to the max. Mm-hmm. Just keep in mind that every operating system in the Russian military has been a failure. His intelligence has been a failure. His logistics have been failures. His leadership has been a failure. His reconnaissance has been a failure. What has actually succeeded for the Russian military? What has succeeded? And I can't identify anything that has been a success. Maybe their artillery. And what's it been? It's been a huge embarrassment for him. And now he is unable to accomplish his mission the way it was designed. His generals have let him down. His spy chief has let him down. And he is, I think right now, he's going around with a hatchet and eliminating a lot of people that he feels are not up to the task.
General, as you know, it's one thing to take a city. It's another thing to hold the city. The fortitude of the Ukrainian people, I mean, even the civilians making Molotov cocktails so they can be guerrilla warfighters. I think he, like you said, he knows holding that city is going to be much more difficult, if almost impossible, than just taking it.
Well, I tell you, that's an absolutely true statement, what you just said, because urban warfare will grind you down. Mm-hmm. I mean, the advantage is to the defender, always. And if he gets in there and starts trying to fight in those cities, he's going to lose a lot more soldiers. You know, there are rumors that he's already lost about 15,000 soldiers to the Ukrainians. That's dead.
General, I've heard reports, and maybe, sir, you have as well, too, that Russian soldiers were originally told that Ukrainians would be welcoming them in with open arms. Well, it was just the opposite, that Russian soldiers, to not proceeding, are personally sabotaging their own equipment, Russian equipment, so that they don't proceed further in.
Keep in mind, too, that the majority of the young soldiers, the overwhelming majority of the young soldiers, are conscripts. Mm-hmm. And they didn't sign up for this. They didn't sign up for this war. And when they actually were deployed to the borders there, they were told it was an exercise. One of the most revealing videos that I have seen, and you may have seen it, was a Russian that had surrendered. And a Ukrainian woman gave him food and water. And he began to weep. And he began to weep because his own logistics system had not fed him. And the Ukrainians were actually showing him mercy.
So do you think the sanctions that we imposed, first off, we didn't start imposing any sanctions until after the invasion, after they invaded, and which was like after 3 to 4 weeks of them being built up. First off, do you think the sanctions are doing any good? And do you think that that we waited too long?
Yeah, I think the sanctions should have been imposed before he invaded. Mm-hmm. It makes no sense. First of all, he calculated what the sanctions were going to do to him, and he knew what the worst case was, what the best case was, and he calculated all that. You're not going to bring him down with sanctions. What did you think he was there for? Did anybody really believe, and I heard commentators say, he's not going to invade? No.
Right.
He was intent on invading from the very beginning, and he was intent on taking the entire country, not just the Donbass region.
General, do you think when it comes to the way Putin told the United States that they put their nuclear weapons on alert, this put whether you could say maybe a fear or maybe a concern into the Biden administration as to not moving more armaments than they had been? Because originally, from what I understand, Donald Trump had a shipment of arms that was to be delivered in March of last year. That what happened was when the new administration came in, he automatically canceled it. And then they were going to put another shipment in later, and then that was canceled as well, too. So by saying that, talking about Russia, saying that we put our nuclear weapons on alert, that put a fear into the administration that they didn't want to irritate Vladimir Putin.
I don't think there's any question about it that it did, in fact, work to his advantage. Now, you stop and think about this. Our president keeps talking about escalation. That would be escalatory if we gave the Ukrainians 28 MiG-29s. The only thing that he has is a nuclear arsenal. His military has failed miserably, as we've said previously. So what are we afraid of? What are we afraid that it's going to escalate to? A nuclear exchange? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to result in a nuclear exchange. Vladimir Putin cannot survive. Keep in mind that across his border there are at least 3-4 countries that have nuclear weapons of their own that are sitting on his border. Do you really think that he wants to use a nuclear weapon and watch Moscow disappear? He will be the last czar. We've got to move away from that thinking.
In 1973, for the Middle East War, which a lot of people know it as the Yom Kippur War, we, the United States, put our nuclear weapons on alert first, which our purpose that, and I didn't, at the time, we didn't know this, but later on, Richard Nixon wanted to make the Russians so concerned that they would de-escalate, and it worked by us putting our nuclear weapons on alert in 1973. Well, there may not be anyone in the administration that knows of the 1973 Middle East War of Yom Kippur, but I'm sure they could have read that. They could have said all Putin is doing the same thing that the United States did in almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, and we did the same thing in the Cuban Missile Crisis too. So
yes, we went to DEFCON. That's exactly. I think for the Yom Kippur we went to DEFCON 3, if I'm not mistaken. But you're absolutely right. If you're just joining us, we're talking right now. We're so happy to have him, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, former Undersecretary of Defense, SecDev. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. We're talking with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, former Undersecretary of Defense. There's a type of bomb that is officially not considered nuclear. It's called a thermobaric bomb or a vacuum bomb. And this is I guess, probably the next level before going nuclear. Do you think, as what you were talking about before, where he's now leveling cities, that he would use something like a thermobaric vacuum bomb?
Yeah, I believe that they have been banned, at least by international treaty, maybe the Geneva Convention or an update of the Geneva Convention. And keep in mind, these are devastating. I mean, they're not nuclear, but they are devastating. In fact, they have been known to suck the lungs right out of a human being that was in proximity to these things when they went off. So I don't know how the United States or the NATO nations would react if one of those kinds of bombs was actually used, because they are very dangerous, they're very devastating, and they don't discriminate very well. So if they dropped one over close to the border around Lviv, like the bombs that they dropped there the other day on that international training site, that could have a huge impact on Poland because of the people in that border area there. So that would be an attack on NATO.
Prior to 1994, Ukraine had the third highest amount of nuclear weapons, because when the Soviet pullback, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine had a lot. So what the United States and actually Russia and UK and a number of countries did, they had what was called the Budapest Memorandum, which was an agreement that if you give up Ukraine, if you give up your nuclear weapons, the United States will agree to protect, but also the Soviets, the Russia, will agree not to invade. Well, as we see, and it was in 1994 that it was signed and agreed to. Well, as we see now in 2022, things have changed quite a bit. Are we beholden, do you think, with that Budapest agreement?
Well, it certainly seems to me that we are, and it seems to me that we've obviously walked away from the agreement that we made there. I've not read the details of the agreement or how it's actually constructed, but I remember very distinctly when that occurred, and clearly the understanding was, and I was on active duty at the time. The understanding was that if they would give up their nukes and put them back under Russian control, that the United States would guarantee their security, would come to their aid if they were attacked, and Russia agreed that they would not attack the Ukraine if those weapons were turned over to them. And we see where we are today on that. So I think that America does have an obligation. Now, I don't know what the details of that were, again, as to what that defense of Ukraine meant, whether it meant actual military members on the ground or whether it meant providing what we're providing now, which is materiel and warfighting things that they would need. But yeah, I think we do have an obligation.
Do you think that the way we pulled out of Afghanistan had anything to do with Putin deciding to invade Ukraine right now?
Yeah, I think it would be foolish on our part if we denied that our showing in Afghanistan was abysmal. That the world watched us bumble around there and not only lose 13 Americans, but we also turned over, $83 billion worth of new materiel, war-fighting materiel to our enemy, to the people we had been fighting against for 20 years. And then we left Americans behind. We left Americans and allies behind. That was a humiliating embarrassment. That was the results of a administration that has put far more emphasis on being woke than on being ready to fight and win wars. And don't think for a minute that didn't influence Vladimir Putin in some way. You know, it was obvious. If you just think about this, he didn't do anything during Donald Trump's period in the White House. He didn't attack any countries. He didn't take any lands. And now he watches the debacle in Afghanistan, and he sees that our administration is weak. And what do you think he might have figured? It's now or never, because I don't know what comes after this administration. It could be another Trump-like administration. And I think that that's exactly what part of his thinking is that he's got to do it now, or it's potentially going to become much more difficult in the future because of right now we have a weak administration.
I'm sure China, Xi Jinping, is watching this right now, and I know he's salivating probably on wanting to take Taiwan. Do you think what's going on with Ukraine, with Vladimir Putin, the way he's handling it, will he think either he'll have no better time than now to take Taiwan because of the administration that's right now in office, or does he think, I better not do it because of the galvanizing of the free world against Putin?
I think when Putin went over, is, by the way, the only head of state that went to the Olympics. I think when Putin went over, no question they had a sit down and Putin rolled out what he was planning to do. And I suspect it was met with a lot of enthusiasm by the Chinese. However, I think that the miserable display that has been demonstrated here by Vladimir Putin and his military has given the Chinese pause. The Chinese want Taiwan more than anything else. That is their ultimate goal, is to take Taiwan. But I got to tell you, I think they're rethinking the timing on that as a result of this miserable display by their allies, the Russians. I suspect, if anything, it has caused them to go back and rethink the timing on this. And I believe that nothing will happen until after the Chinese Communist Party meeting in October of this year. That's a 5-year meeting. Every 5 years, they choose the head of state, they choose the leaders at all levels, and they choose the policies that are going to be followed. And I don't think now they're going to do anything with regards to Taiwan until that meeting is over.
I thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I hope you come back.
Hey, it's great being with you.
Thank you, General. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it pithy, make it concise, and write us at Andre@WallStreetWrapUp.info. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, on this day, on March 18th, what bank was formed with Henry and William in 1852? We'll have that answer in just a minute. Well, on this day, March 18th, what bank was formed by Henry and William in 1852? Wells Fargo. Henry Wells and William Fargo formed Wells Fargo Bank 2 years after their original business called American Express Company was formed in 1850. Well, this week, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky addressed both chambers of Congress asking for additional help in fighting the Russian invasion. Congress this week passed an $800 million assistance package sending Ukraine weapons. Included in this package are 800 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, 2,000 Javelin, 1,000 light anti-armor weapons, 100 grenade launchers, along with 5,000 rifles, pistols, and shotguns. Not included were the MiG-29 fighter jets that President Zelensky was requesting. And finally tonight, have you ever asked a friend or maybe a family member for their Netflix password? Well, Netflix is now testing an added charge because they're seeing lost revenue. They're rolling out an extra member program charge presently only in Chile, Peru, and in Costa Rica. This extra member is for up to 2 people that do not live with you for an extra fee of $3 per month. Now, where it gets very interesting is how do they know it's not you? And you're just in another location, maybe you're traveling, or maybe in your vacation home. Time will tell, but just be aware. Well, in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking with former Congressman Mike Rogers. Mike was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, as well as a former special agent with the FBI. Mike will be with us in a couple of weeks. And next week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, we're going to be talking with the former ambassador to the UN, Thomas Pickering. Ambassador Pickering, in addition to being ambassador to the UN, he was also former ambassador to Russia, Israel, India, Nigeria, and in Jordan. That's next week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, former ambassador Tom Pickering. Well, as a reminder, we do repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that is our show for Friday, March the 18th, 2022. I hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to General Jerry Boykin for joining us this evening, but as always, it's you. We appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. And remember, you can always follow us on all the social media, Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So enjoy your weekend ahead and have a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm André LaBorde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.